It was a warm afternoon in Ouagadougou, May 2025, when President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso received an unexpected call. On the line was Amanda Collins, a senior producer from CNN International. Her voice was professional but brimming with anticipation. "President Traoré, we'd like to invite you for a live interview on global leaders. It will air across the United States and 45 other countries." At 35, Ibrahim had earned global respect for his bold diplomacy and youth-focused leadership. He glanced at his schedule before responding with calm curiosity. "And what will be the focus of the interview?" "We'd like to explore your views on youth leadership, African development, and international relations," Amanda replied. Ibrahim agreed immediately. 2 hours later, he was seated in a makeshift studio at the presidential palace, adjusting his navy blue suit as technicians completed sound checks. Meanwhile, 5,000 miles away in Washington, D.C., it was 10 a.m. in the Oval Office. President Donald Trump, now 78, was flipping through television channels, as he often did to monitor global news. At his side, First Lady Melania Trump was reviewing event invitations. "Honey, who's this young African president?" she asked, eyeing the screen. "Ibrahim Traoré from Burkina Faso," Trump replied without much interest. "A kid who's been making some diplomatic waves lately." He had no idea that the calm morning was about to descend into chaos. The CNN host, James Richardson, opened the interview with conventional questions about Burkina Faso's growing economy. Ibrahim responded eloquently, citing statistics and sharing stories of innovation and youth empowerment. Everything was proceeding smoothly, until Richardson veered into diplomacy. "President Traoré, how do you see the role of first ladies in modern diplomacy?" Ibrahim smiled thoughtfully. "First ladies play a fundamental role. They humanize politics. They build cultural bridges where policy can't." "Any specific examples?" Richardson asked. And that's when Ibrahim made what would later be described as an innocent diplomatic misstep. "Yes, I can mention Melania Trump. She's elegant, composed, and truly embodies American grace. My wife Ajara often says she admires her style and poise. Honestly, she's one of the most impressive first ladies Washington has seen." In the Oval Office, Trump nodded approvingly. "Well, at least someone recognizes your class," he said to Melania. But Ibrahim wasn't finished. "Actually, James," he added, leaning in with a boyish grin, "I have a confession. Before I met my wife, when I was still a young soldier, I had a bit of a crush on Melania. I used to see her photos in fashion magazines and think, now, that is an extraordinary woman." Of course, that was long before she married President Trump. The CNN studio fell silent. Richardson blinked. The air turned electric. "So, you admired the First Lady before she became First Lady?" he asked cautiously. "Exactly," Ibrahim said with a laugh. "Back then, I followed international fashion. Melania was one of the most elegant models of her time." In Washington, Trump's mood shifted like a thunderclap. His face flushed crimson. The veins in his neck bulged. "What did that kid just say?" he snapped, standing up. Melania tried to calm him. "Donald, he just said he admired me as a model." "Admired had a crush. Who does this African think he is?" Trump roared, pointing at the TV. Aides rushed into the room. Chief of Staff, John Kelly, tried to de-escalate. "Mr. President, it was just a harmless comment about her modeling career." "Harmless," Trump fumed. "That 35-year-old punk just announced on live TV that he fantasized about my wife." Melania sighed. "Donald, it was over 20 years ago. I was a model. Admiration came with the job. I don't care if it was 100 years ago," Trump snapped. "No world leader talks like that about the First Lady of the United States." Back in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim continued, unaware of the firestorm brewing. Richardson, desperately trying to change the subject, asked, "President Traoré, let's return to the economy." But Ibrahim, clearly enjoying the moment, added with a smile, "You know, my wife Ajara always says Melania is her model of elegance. I sometimes joke that if I hadn't met Ajara, I might have tried to win Melania's heart, especially when she came to Africa for her humanitarian missions." Richardson nearly choked on his water. In Washington, Trump exploded. "Now he's saying he'd try to steal my wife. This is war." He reached for the phone, barking orders. "Get Blinken on the line. I want sanctions on Burkina Faso." Immediately, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, caught off guard, picked up, "Mr. President. Sanctions? On what grounds?" This Ibrahim guy went on CNN and declared he had a crush on the First Lady. He basically proposed to her on live television. "He said he wants to steal my wife." The White House descended into full-blown crisis mode. Aides rushed through the halls. Phones rang without pause, and President Trump continued his tirade in the Oval Office. "I want this Ibrahim on the terrorist list," he bellowed. Sarah Matthews, the press secretary, attempted to step in. "Mr. President, with respect, he didn't say he'd steal the First Lady. He was just admiring her as a role model." "Technically," Trump snapped, face flushed with rage. Technically, he said he'd try to win her if he hadn't met his wife. That's not admiration, that's public humiliation. Melania, ever the voice of reason, stepped forward carefully. Donald, honey, you're overreacting. It was clearly a misstatement, a clumsy joke. He meant no harm. Trump turned on her. Are you defending him now? Maybe you like the attention from this African boy. The words landed like a slap. In the room, a tense, paralyzing silence followed. Melania's eyes narrowed with icy precision. Donald Trump, you just crossed a line, she said, her voice low but raised. Don't you dare question my loyalty because of your childish jealousy. Everyone in the room stood frozen. The First Lady turned and walked out without another word. Back in Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim Traoré concluded the CNN interview with a satisfied smile. I think it went well, he told his wife Ajara, who had been quietly observing from the corner. She gave him a skeptical look. You mentioned Melania Trump ... several times. It was just an example of powerful female diplomacy, Ibrahim said casually, oblivious to the storm now swirling across the Atlantic. Just then, communications advisor Musa Kabor burst into the room, holding out his phone. Mr. President, you need to see this. American Twitter is on fire. Trump is tweeting about you. Ibrahim took the phone. The first tweet read, @Real Donald Trump, the juvenile dictator of Burkina Faso, just publicly disrespected the First Lady of the United States. Unacceptable. There will be consequences. More tweets followed in rapid succession. This President Ibrahim Traoré needs to learn respect. Nobody talks about my wife like that, nobody. @Real Donald Trump, Melania is the most admired First Lady in the world. This third world soldier needs to shut his mouth. Ibrahim blinked at the screen, stunned. What did I even say? He muttered. Ajara, reading over his shoulder, grew pale. Ibrahim, what exactly did you say in the interview? Just that I admired Melania as a role model. And maybe if I hadn't met you, I'd be at. Maybe, what? She demanded. ... Maybe I would have tried to win her over. When she visited Africa for humanitarian work, it was a joke. Ajara buried her face in her hands. Ibrahim, you basically said you wanted to steal the wife of the American president on live global television. Meanwhile, in Washington, chaos escalated. Trump had called an emergency meeting of the National Security Council. The Situation Room was tense. I want military options against Burkina Faso, Trump shouted as he stormed in. General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, tried to maintain composure. Mr. President, with all due respect, this appears to be a diplomatic misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Trump slammed his fist on the table. He said he'd tried to win my wife. That's not diplomacy. That's a personal declaration of war. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, patched in via video, tried to be the voice of reason. Mr. President, I've contacted our embassy in Ouagadougou. We can resolve this diplomatically. Diplomatically. Trump laughed bitterly. This kid humiliated the President of the United States on CNN. I want sanctions. I want embargoes. Hell, ban every African export if we have to. Across Africa, the news spread like wildfire. Some leaders called Ibrahim in alarm, others in laughter. In Nigeria, Kenya, Senegal, memes exploded. News channels looped clips of the interview, and social media lit up with hashtags like #MELANIA-Gates, #CrushCrisis, and #BurkinaBurnsDC. Ibrahim convened an emergency cabinet meeting at the presidential palace. Ministers filed in, eyes wide, gripping reports on America's response. Foreign Minister Dr. Whittago cleared his throat. Mr. President, we need an official statement. The global press is covering this like it's the Cuban Missile Crisis. The room buzzed with anxiety. Ibrahim Ajara said softly, you need to fix this, fast. He nodded, rubbing his temples. All this, over a compliment. Ibrahim leaned slightly toward the camera, voice steady and resolute. And I invite you, President Trump, to remember that leadership is not measured by how loudly one shouts, or how many sanctions one imposes, but by how one handles misunderstanding. With dignity, the room in Ouagadougou was silent, the tension palpable, yet his staff stood a little taller. Even Ajara, standing off Camorra, gave a small nod of approval. I will not respond to personal insults with more insults. I will not drag our nations into conflict over wounded pride. Instead, I reaffirm Burkina Faso's commitment to peaceful diplomacy, mutual respect, and the principle that jokes, however poorly phrased, should never justify economic warfare. He paused again, letting the words settle. To the American people, I extend my hand in friendship. To the international community, I ask, what kind of precedent are we setting when humor becomes a cause for embargo? And to President Trump, I say, leadership is not about protecting one's ego. It is about protecting one's people. The broadcast ended with a brief but dignified bow. The message had been sent. Washington, D.C., The White House was quiet. Trump sat in front of the television, jaw clenched, alone in the private residence. Melania was nowhere in sight. His phone buzzed endlessly, but he ignored it. The CNN panel had already begun analyzing the speech. Double quotes, "A masterclass in calm diplomacy," said one analyst. Ibrahim Traoré just positioned himself as the adult in the room, and Trump's tantrum has backfired spectacularly, said another. He turned a passing comment into an international incident, and now he's being called out by world leaders and comedians alike. The hashtag marital insecurity crisis was trending worldwide. Even late-night hosts were weighing in. Trevor Noah joked, "Imagine being so jealous. You sanction an entire country because someone said your wife was hot. 15 years ago. At the UN headquarters, murmurs filled the corridors. Several African diplomats prepared to deliver a joint statement denouncing America's disproportionate and punitive reaction. Behind closed doors, European leaders expressed private frustration with Trump's instability. Meanwhile, a surprise message arrived in It was from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who offered quiet support and hinted at easing economic tensions through alternative partnerships. "You're not alone." The message ended. That night, in the presidential residence, and Ibrahim sat quietly on the balcony, the city lights of Ouagadougou twinkling in the distance. "You were brilliant," Ajara said, handing him a cup of tea. Ibrahim smiled wearily. "I just told the truth." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Then let the world hear it." Ibrahim leaned slightly toward the camera and spoke with quiet strength. "If your reaction to praise for your wife's past career is this explosive, how do you respond to real threats to American security?" A pause, then the final jab. Calm, surgical. "Maybe the problem isn't what I said about Melania. Maybe the problem is how you treat Melania." The silence that followed echoed around the globe. Within minutes, social media ignited. #InsecureTrump began trending worldwide. Truth resurfaced with new force. In Washington, Trump sat alone in the Oval Office watching the reactions roll in. Each headline cut deeper than the last. Ibrahim Traoré just gave the American president a lesson in maturity. CNN, a 35-year-old leader, shows more dignity than a 78-year-old veteran. BBC, Trump punishes a country over a compliment. Pathetic. The Guardian, Ibrahim Traoré. 1. Trump. 0. Trending tweet with over 2 million likes. Then came the blow he hadn't prepared for. Melania appeared at the door of the Oval Office. Trump looked up, expecting support, but he saw only disappointment. In her eyes, "Donald," she said, her voice cold and deliberate, "you turned an innocent compliment into an international crisis." "I was defending you," he muttered, already sounding unsure. "No, you were defending your ego," she replied. "Ibrahim Traoré spoke about me with more respect in that interview than you do on most days." Her words were the final blow. Trump realized, bitterly, that he had not only lost the diplomatic battle, he had lost the personal one too. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, calls flooded in from world leaders. French President Emmanuel Macron phoned personally. "Ibrahim, your dignity in this ridiculous situation was exemplary." Across the globe, headlines praised the young African president who had not only stood up to the most powerful man in the world, but done so with restraint and honor. The Melanian incident, as the press dubbed it, reshaped geopolitics. 3 weeks later, under immense international and domestic pressure, Trump lifted all sanctions against Burkina Faso. Then came the most unexpected call of all. Melania Trump, President Traoré. Her refined voice carried across the line. "I would like to personally apologize for my husband's behavior. Your remarks about my career were respectful. His reaction was ... inappropriate." Ibrahim smiled warmly. "First Lady, there is no need to apologize. I understand your position is delicate." "It's not delicate, President. It's embarrassing," she replied bluntly. "I would like to invite you and your wife to a private dinner at the White House, when possible." The 20-minute call was interpreted globally as Melania's quiet act of statesmanship, an attempt to restore dignity where her husband had failed. In the U.S., Trump's approval ratings plummeted. A staggering 67% of Americans called his response disproportionate and humiliating. Even within the Republican Party, whispers turned to grumbles. If he explodes like this over a compliment to his wife, how will he respond to a real crisis? Said one senator, anonymously. In contrast, Burkina Faso thrived. Ibrahim Traoré became an international symbol of composure and integrity. He was invited to speak at universities on 5 continents about mature diplomacy in an age of polarization. Foreign investment surged by 340% as companies cited confident leadership in uncertain times. 6 months later, on a quiet afternoon in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim strolled through the palace gardens with Ajara. "Did you know that joke would cause all this?" she asked, smiling. He laughed softly. "Absolutely not. But it taught me something important." "What's that?" "That true strength doesn't lie in exploding when provoked. It lies in maintaining dignity when tested." The story of the young African president who kept his cool while the most powerful man on earth lost his temper became a case study in diplomacy schools worldwide. Ibrahim Traoré had proven a timeless truth. Maturity has no age. dignity is mightier than forced elegance, even in international politics, always triumphs over brutality.